So this is part of the Proculturator series. The heck is a Proculturator, Jill? Well, so Resmaa Menakem, the author of the book My Grandmother's Hands, which deals with racialized trauma in Black and white people, basically asked for white people to create anti-racist culture. And create anti was kind of sticking in my craw. And I knew enough to know that many successful movements know that creating a pro something works better for the mind, works better to bring people in, like pro-choice. I mean, like, I'm sorry, pro-life instead of anti-choice, or the Defense of Marriage Act instead of anti-same-sex marriage. These folks know what they were doing. And I think we need to think along the lines of that too. Like, what do people's minds want to gravitate toward? So I found this, or rather resurrected this word that a Georgian, not like the state of Georgia, but Soviet Georgia, former Soviet academic could use in a slightly different context. I thought, you know, Lynn Burnett's work, he's a historian who creates detailed profiles, fleshes out the stories of white anti-racists, living and dead, is helping to create white anti-racist culture. And so I was so terribly excited to see this work and to bring him into the Proculturators series. At the end, we'll tell you a little bit more about what we do and how we stay in touch and all of that. But for now, what we're going to do today is Lynn is going to talk about some of the folks who he's researching. He's researched many. Do you have a number, Lynn? It's in the dozens now, right?
Yeah. So I'm creating I'm compiling kind of short 1 to 2 page profiles of different white anti-racist ancestors and elders. That's up to 41 right now. And I'm also working on a series of really deep dive pieces. My latest one is about a white minister named George Herbeck who worked with Fred Hampton and started a white anti-racist spiritual community. And that's along the line of 40 pages. So,
oh my gosh, yeah, that was really long. So,
yeah.
So we're going to go over, we'll see 2 or 3 of the folks. Anne Braden, who was one of the key figures in the civil rights movement. Bob Zellner, who was one of the SNCC Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's first white members. And Mab Seagrass, who is alive and well and is going to be interviewed next year early in this series. So we're going to talk for probably, let's see, it's 12:17 right now. We're probably going to talk till maybe 10 of 1 or 1. We'll see how it all goes. And then imagining you all may have questions or get inspired. We're going to go into breakout rooms. You're going to have a chance to talk about what inspires you, what your next steps might want to be. See if you have any questions for Lynn or thoughts that you want to share, and get to know some of the people here in this group. And then we'll come back to the large group and you can share some of what came up in the small group. And then we'll leave a little bit of time at the end to share more about what's available in the series and beyond. And then that will be it. So I'm kind of excited to start with Mab Seagrass. Could we do that? Because I first heard her name in college. And, you know, I saw this video that's on her site where she goes to the grave sites of some of her white racist ancestors and just talks about what that's like, what their roles were in the racist history of this country, and calls them names. Her first book was Memoirs of a Race Traitor, and that was recently reissued. And she has another one, and I'll let Lynn take it away about Mab Seagrass.
Yeah, I love starting with Mab, and I'm really excited that you're going to be in discussion with her. I think that an opportunity to be in discussion with Mab Seagrass is not to be missed. So I just dropped the link to the event where you'll have a chance to really talk with someone who's really one of the greatest living white anti-racist figures today. So please check out and share it with your friends. Yeah, so Mab Seagrass is a queer white Southern woman who is taking on new formations of white supremacy in the post-civil rights era. So in the post-civil rights era, there's this real, it's an era of kind of mass white denial. There's even white people who had supported the civil rights movement were really keen to move on from it. They didn't want to have to think about racial oppression anymore. There was this really widespread narrative that the civil rights movement had really solved everything. And so Mab Seagrass is an example of a white person who's really pushing back against that narrative. And she's also an example of someone who, in the 1980s, as there's new manifestations of white power movements, there's a resurgence of the Klan, there's a resurgence of neo-Nazi movements, and a lot of people didn't want to look at this. So she's an example of someone who is organizing to shine light on the fact that there is, in fact, a resurgence of violent white supremacy. So part of what was happening in the 1980s was that during this kind of rebirth of violent white power movements, there were a lot of there were murders and kidnappings and armored cars being attacked and all these instances of violence that the media was kind of labeling as isolated incidents. And Mab Seagrass is someone who had studied violent white supremacy and was organizing against it, realized that these were not isolated events, that there was in fact, that these were connected, that there was a nationwide kind of resurgence of violent white supremacy happening. And so she's an example of a white anti-racist who realizes that the media is not always going to connect the dots, and police forces are not always going to connect the dots. And so she is really doing a lot of her own original research to identify the fact that these are white supremacists, these are violent acts of white supremacy in the first place, but also that they're not so-called lone wolf events, but that they're all really interconnected. And so today's militia movements really grow out of the rebirth of white power movements in the 1980s, and Mab Seagrass was someone who was really identifying that at the very beginning, at a time period when a lot of where a lot of people in the media and police forces and just white people in general didn't want to look seriously on what was going on. And something else that I like. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jill.
Well, when one person speaks out, it's easier for the next person. Somebody points out the elephant in the room. It's sort of like other people exhale. And I want you to go and finish your thought. I realized I wanted to ask you more at the beginning about what led you to this work, but please continue.
Hold on, just before you finish that thought, Lynn, is there a way to get closer to your mic or improve your audio quality a bit?
I could try standing closer to the computer, and I'm doing that right now, so it's not working.
Let's see.
No.
Do a test 1 2, test 1 2.
Test 1 2, test 1 2.
Yeah, a little better. Okay. Well, let's see how it goes.
Yeah, are other people also, could you give me a thumbs up if you're having trouble hearing my voice? Okay, so people are having trouble hearing my voice. Tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and plug my earphones in and speak into it, so that way I can speak into a mic close to. So I'll be back in just 1 minute, okay?
Okay, and in the meantime, I want to share my screen and show you what to me looks like a really sweet picture, if I can find it again. Hang on. I just opened it up. Where did it go? That's the link here that that Lynn put in. Oh, there it is. Okay. I want to show you something really sweet about this link. David, can I share my screen? Yeah, I can. Okay. Hang on. So this is the Proculturators series event that features Mab Seagrass, and this is her now. And this collage in the background is something that I borrowed from Lynn Burnett's White Anti-Racist Ancestry series. I borrowed it with his permission to use as the background for all of the Proculturator series events. And it already had Mab Seagrass in it. This is a young Mab Seagrass down here in the corner that he already had included in this collage, and I highlighted it. I highlighted it using kind of a rainbow thing because she's also a queer activist. So I just thought that was so sweet that we get to interview her in February live, and she's part of this this collection. So I'm going to stop the share.
I think we lost our guest.
Well, he'll be back. And in the
Okay.
meantime, I want to talk a little bit about the kind of awkwardness of centering whiteness and anti-racism. Has anybody else felt like a little bit strange about that? Like, yeah, you're nodding, Jody. Nancy, you're nodding. Dolly, yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about that because, you know, there are different levels that we work on here, and it can look very uncomfortable when one level looks like the other. For example, if somebody's storming the Capitol in defense of whiteness, and then we turn around and center whiteness, even if it's to be anti-racist, it can feel very uncomfortable. And what I want to say about that is that the context matters, and how we approach it matters. I'm part of many groups, but one group on Facebook is called White People Doing Something. And at least one person has entered that group thinking that it was about defending whiteness against whatever imagined attacks are there. So I think there are times and places when it's appropriate to center whiteness for the purpose of deconstructing it, for the purpose of seeing what we can do about whiteness to make it less harmful and less fatal for our Black and brown sisters and brothers and non-binary siblings. I think it's appropriate to center whiteness when we're looking at how it constructs our own responses to the world, and how we can excavate a deeper level of humanity underneath that conditioned whiteness. How does that land with you all? You free to disagree, to chime in. I see a thumb. You can unmute and say something if you like. Otherwise, I can keep going a little bit more.
Tell a short story.
Mm-hmm.
It's the story. I think it's I'm not sure it's a true story, but of a family that bought an old hotel in New York City, built hundreds of years ago, 200 years ago. And it was not possible for handicapped people to enter the building. And, but he bought it back in the 50s when there really weren't many handicap laws. And as times changed and more rules became around about providing access for the less abled among us, like ramps and so on, wheelchair accessible places, it suddenly became a burden on this family that hadn't anticipated it, that they had to invest time, effort, and money in retrofitting this building that they didn't create it that way. It wasn't their fault that it wasn't handicap enabled, but they owned it and they had this obligation to fix it. So they had to put the time into doing it because it was theirs. And so that I look at that as a sort of metaphor for whiteness in a way. We didn't do this, but we have to fix it. Anyway, that's my little story. Hope that was all right for people.
Yeah, thank you, David. I appreciate that.
And I just want to jump in and say that I love the work that you're doing, and I just feel so honored and blessed to be a part of this today. I'm excited to actually learn what you're doing, more about it, but so far I am really liking what I hear.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Looks like Lynn is getting back in. One more thing I wanted to say is I sent out an article that Lynn wrote. Many of the powers that be, the defenders of whiteness, whiteness is a constructed identity. Whiteness didn't exist before oppression. Whiteness was invented to oppress and enslave peoples of color. Being a light-skinned person of European descent, we are who got labeled white. But it's a construct, and one of my passions is to excavate our humanity underneath the whiteness. I think whiteness got adopted as a strategy for justifying oppression and murder and more. And a lot of people are confused about that. They're clinging to whiteness, and people are literally dying. There's a book out by Jonathan Metzl called dying for whiteness, or dying of whiteness, how the politics of racial resentment is killing America's heartland. He did 10 years of research to find out that the policies that people adopted to make their lives greater are actually resulting in greater deaths by guns and suicide, lowered health outcomes, higher high school dropout rates. Dying white. And an irony of that is that when where did Lynn go? I just let him in. Lynn,
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, there you are. You're right in the middle of where I am. I didn't see you. I was talking to pass the time until you got here. There you are. You're lighter and brighter and louder and great.
I'm not only having internet troubles, I'm using an old computer. I just had to call it from my phone. So I apologize for taking so much time to get back on.
No worries. You subjected people to having to hear me talk, and I think that's probably unforgivable, but let's go. I wanted to backpedal a little bit, Lynn, and ask you about how this came about. I know how it did, but I really like the story, and I want you to share it with others if you're willing.
Yeah, so my project is called the White Antiracist Ancestry Project, and this project came about when George Floyd was murdered, and there was this moment where millions of white people were pouring into the streets and really asking themselves, what they could do and how they needed to be, how can I show up for racial justice, was a question that was really alive at that time. And so myself, by this time, I had been writing about racial justice history, for many years by that time. And so I was asking myself, what was my role as a white man who was a student of racial justice history and someone who wrote about racial justice history? What was my role in that moment? And in that moment, there were also people like, Resmaa Menakem, who I know has really influenced Jill's work. Resmaa was talking about this need for white people to build up a white anti-racist culture, and to look to, and he and many other Black freedom thinkers were asking white people to look at how the work had been done in the past, so that they could, learn from the previous experiences of white anti-racists who had done a really excellent job. So I was thinking to myself at that time that was the kind of work that I could do, that I was someone who, as a writer, could lift up those stories and help to, bring some role models out into the world that white people who are wanting to show up for racial justice today could look to, as a source of inspiration, and also so that they could learn, how this work has been done really, really well in the past.
Thank you. And I like what you said in your article, which I really recommend. And I'll try to put the link in the chat while you're talking, or maybe if somebody has it, they can put it in the link. That there's a subversive component to this, that people don't want this information to be known because it is dangerous to white supremacy.
Exactly. Just like so much racial justice history has been either portrayed in a really safe way, for white supremacy, or has just been made to be totally invisible. The history of white anti-racist, white anti-racist history has also been made to be invisible. And I think that one of the reasons for that is if masses of white people learn how to show up in this world as white people in a way that actually undermines white supremacy, that if that happens on a wide scale, then things really change. And so that's not in the interest of, power structures that currently exist today.
Yeah, and one of the things we were talking about while you were offline is this sort of uncomfortable moment or moments where we apparently center whiteness, and doesn't that seem sort of wrong, given that we're trying to deconstruct it? Well, it needs examining. It needs an overhaul. Whiteness needs to be stripped of whiteness and humanity released from the confines of white supremacy. And that takes work. In order to do that, we need to focus on ourselves and what has happened to us so that we can make greater sense of it, so that we can talk to, Uncle Fred and cousin, Susie and their friend from high school who insists that they don't see color and we're actually the racists. We need to excavate how the whiteness lives in us and come up with new tools and ways of connecting so that we can get the word out. Oh, Lynn, you're muted.
I'm not sure how that happened. I'm back. I feel like along those lines, one of the things that's powerful about getting white anti-racist history out there is that there's this real narrative. There's a right-wing narrative that anti-racism is something that's anti-white. And I think that when we look at histories of white anti-racism, it's really clear that racial justice history is not anti-white, but rather the history of white people who show up for racial justice history. They present an aspirational model of how to show up in the world as white people. And I think that it helps to undermine that right-wing narrative of anti-racism, being an anti-white thing, because it's not at all.
Yeah, and I used some of that thinking. Thank you for that. I used some of that. I did the dubious act of boosting the post for this event on Facebook, and that attracted just such a wide range of angry white men calling me all kinds of things, godless. I need to, I must hate white people, all kinds of things. And so I kind of love this stuff in a perverse sort of way. Like I like engaging, like throw it at me. I don't take anything personally. I'll use it as fodder to try to untangle the madness, frankly, that is whiteness and what it produces, the utterances that are now quite predictable. I'm like, okay, bring it. I have something to say for anything you can throw at me. I'm going to help you untangle. I'm going to invite you into allyhood. Even though my ego wants to be right, this is not about putting other people down. It's about helping them to get clearer, helping them to disabuse themselves of these notions that they were frankly whitewashed and brainwashed into from birth.
Yeah.
Love the person, hate the whiteness. Somebody asked, can you talk about the wokeness backlash and how important is it for civility to be maintained? How do you feel about great questions. Let's save those for the questions part and let Lynn for right now. Debbie, would you be able to park that question in a doc somewhere? And then if you have other questions, we can also park those and take them one by one when we get to that part.
Please repeat the question.
There's a question in the chat right above your
that question.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. So any more about Mab Seagrass, or shall we go on to the next person?
Yeah, I felt like I was rushing through her a bit. One thing that I would like to add to her is I think she's a really brilliant psychologist of whiteness, of white supremacy, and also of what the white anti-racist path looks like. And to really do that justice, I would read her autobiography, Memoir of a Race Traitor. But I wanted to lift up just one or two things about that dimension of her life. So her first real questioning of white supremacy is she's a teenager in Tuskegee, during the civil rights movement, and her high school is going to be desegregated. And she lives only 2 houses down from the school. And so the school actually prepares for desegregation. So Mapp Seagrass, as a teenager, is expecting to go to a desegregated school. And then what ends up happening is there's a huge backlash. And because she lives so close to the school, the anger and the fear and the bitterness is all right there in front of her house. And she's watching this incredible animosity play out. And for her, she's thinking to herself, this is crazy. How can so much fear and anger, how can the simple act of white and black teenagers like going to school together result in so much incredible bitterness? So this is kind of her first initial, the birth of her awareness that white supremacy is something that actually hurts white people too, because it is not a healthy, it was really clear to her in that moment that it was not a happy and healthy experience of life that those people with so much anger and bitterness and fear were experiencing. And so she goes on for her whole trajectory as a white anti-racist person to really look at the ways that white supremacy hurts white people as well, and how we have a stake in our own freedom in it in all kinds of different ways. In terms of like her kind of her own emotional journey as a white anti-racist, I think that's also really powerful for people on that path today, to be able to look at examples of what that emotional journey has been like for other people. So just like one or two things that I want to lift up for her is she has this experience of no longer being accepted in white communities where she was previously accepted, but also not feeling like she belonged to Black freedom struggle spaces or to Black communities either. So she goes through this real period of questioning of like, where do I belong? And I feel like that's something that so many people, on this path wrestle with, and looking, reading her autobiography and looking at how she works through that. And also as she is fighting Klan member, organizing against the Klan, organizing against neo-Nazis in the 80s and 90s. She goes through a period too where she really comes to fear white people, and she comes to have a lot of animosity towards white people. And at the same time, she feels kind of guilty about that. And she's wrestling with this tension of like, wow, I really am starting to feel deeply uncomfortable around white people. And at the same time, I know that these are the people who I need to be working with, who I need to organize. And so watching how she wrestles with that kind of emotional experience too. Once again, we all go through an emotional journey as white anti-racists, and it looks a different way at different stages of that journey. But I think part of what's powerful about looking at white anti-racist ancestors and elders is that we get to see their emotional journey, and that helps us reflect on our own.
So powerful, Lynn. Thank you. And I want to highlight a word that you uttered, and that word is belonging. I have been thinking a lot about how belonging is really kind of at the root of so much of this. And it's, along with Resmaa Menakem's My Grandmother's Hands, belonging is one of the first books we assign in the 22nd Century Leaders Program for white anti-racists, because, we do this work from the inside out. And if you think about it, think about all of the residents of the United States. Nobody really has an unfettered sense of belonging to this land. First Nations people were largely murdered. Some are surviving, but they had their land stripped, they had their ways stripped. Some of them had their tongues cut and their language taken, and everything was just upended, and they're still like recovering, trying to recover. The light-skinned people of European descent who came here according to the white supremacist doctrine of manifest destiny. Well, God told us to come and take this land and kill the native people. They don't really belong here in the sense of having an indigenous relationship to the land. Jews were fleeing. Many of the white people, the other light-skinned people of European descent who came here were fleeing. Resmaa Menakem talks about that trauma being blown through white bodies that gets then blown through black and brown bodies. And others are immigrants coming from, you know, horrific conditions or looking for better opportunities here. So belonging is a human need. And one of the things Tocopah Turner says in her book, Belonging, is that being in exile, that belonging is a skill set, and that being in exile for whatever reason, if we develop the skill set of belonging, we can create spaces where others can belong.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what Mab Seagrass did. She found that she didn't belong, so she created her own damn tradition, you know, as a race trader, and she paved the way for other people to occupy that space. It's like, oh, this is where I belong. And Lynn, I think in so many ways that is exactly what you're doing. You're opening the doors and saying, white anti-racists, here's a place, here's an ancestry, here's a set of lessons, here are some friendly faces, and here's a Zoom call.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, one thing that I want to say in response to that is that, you know, one of my hopes for these stories is, or I want to put it this way. I've been doing workshops. I've done about 15 workshops on white anti-racist ancestry, mostly for different search chapters around the country in the past year. And something that always happens in these workshops is white parents tell me that they want to have role models for their children. They want to raise children with powerful examples. And so when I think of a sense of belonging, you know, I think of, you know, the part of what I want to see happen with this history is, you know, I want to see white kids being raised thinking to themselves, wow, I want to be like Anne Braden. Wow, I want to be like Mab Seagrass. You know, having access to those stories that show them how to show up as a white person in a way that really helps us to make the world a better place for all of us.
Amen. Speaking of Anne Braden,
Uh-huh.
you want to tell us about Anne Braden?
Yeah, I would love to tell you guys about Anne Braden. I think that Anne Braden, so she's one of the most pivotal white anti-racist figures in US history, especially in terms of being a model of how white people can organize other white people for racial justice. And so the way that Anne Braden goes about this work is she is working for a group during the early civil rights era called the SCEF. The SCEF has a really interesting history that I won't get into, but she is tasked with traveling around the South and identifying white people who might be potentially sympathetic to the civil rights movement. And so what she does is she builds strong relationships with Black and Brown freedom movements through her role also as a journalist in the SCEF. So the SCEF has a newsletter called Southern Patriot. And so what Anne Braden is doing is putting herself in Black freedom spaces, lifting up stories that are happening, and really making sure that those stories are in the words, like of the Black communities who are doing that organizing, and then getting that out to a national audience. And through doing those interviews and doing that writing, she builds relationships with local Black freedom movements and local Black freedom organizations and communities. And as she's doing that, she asks those people, in your area where you're organizing, are there potentially sympathetic white people? And so then she would not call them on the phone. She might do an initial phone call, but she knocks on their door. She makes a personal connection. She meets with these white people and she talks about how they can potentially support the civil rights movement. And then she asks them, do you know other white people? She goes and knocks on their door, and she starts to build a network of white Southerners who are potentially sympathetic to the civil rights movement. And she realizes as she's doing this work that these people are incredibly isolated and that they're very fearful about speaking out. They're afraid of backlash. And so what she does, she recognizes that they have this need. And so what she does is she creates a pen pal program so that white people across the South can begin to meet each other and correspond with each other and share ideas, and to return to belonging, to have some sense of community so they don't feel so isolated in this work. And she also starts to host regional gatherings so that these white people can actually gather in a real physical space, start to build friendships, build community. And also at those regional gatherings, she would invite local Black and Brown leadership so that white people who were potentially sympathetic to the civil rights movement could hear from Black communities what those Black communities thought about how they could show up for racial justice.
Wow, it's beautiful. One thing I want to stress is that these examples represent people with a particular skill set, path, passion, and there's such a range of skill sets and passions that can contribute to this work. Lynn, for example, is a historian. I'm a facilitator and writer. Lynn's a historian and writer. And there are artists, there are archivists of different kinds. There are singers. There's so many different ways. And the people that we're hearing about have their path, and it's so super important. But if you don't feel like you can follow that path exactly, don't worry. There's plenty to do. There are envelopes of stuff and songs to be written, and multicultural potlucks to be organized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing I want to say in response to that is I had a discussion with a group of white middle school students who during the uprisings had created a white affinity group. And I showed them the collection that I was building about, of these short pieces about lots of different white anti-racists. And it was really wonderful to see those students gravitate towards the white anti-racist figures who were similar to them. So kids who liked photography, they gravitated towards the movement photographer Bob Fitch. Kids who were musicians gravitated towards Zilphia Horton, who had used music as a way to build community, and on and on and on. There are lawyers in the struggle, there are teachers in the struggle. There's a role for everyone. And I think that when people see all those different stories, there are certainly going to be people who they feel are like them.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lynn. I love hearing that. And this country, this culture was founded on a kind of rugged individualism that sort of posits usually a man against the world. And even, one of the things I taught in this 22nd Century Leaders Program that we're winding up now is I brought out the book, what's it called? Oh, The Places You'll Go, Dr. Seuss. And so many people, because it's such a cute book and you get it for graduates. But if you look at the book, if you really look at the book, to me, the message is you, young white man, are all alone. And everything that a little boy does, to me, it's like actually kind of heartbreaking. I want to cry. He has to face a monster all alone. Everything he does is all by himself. He has no mentors. He has no friends. He has no community. He doesn't really belong anywhere. And at the end, what does he get to do? He gets to win. And that is the message of our culture, that we have to do things all by ourselves. It's such a profoundly braided into, woven in, insidious, soaked in message that so many of us think that book is just so cute. And then if you really look at it, like, I don't want my son to think that he has to go through all these battles all by himself, and that the best thing that can happen is that he can win, cross the finish line all by himself. I want him to have community. I want him to know that to contribute and be contributed to is an essence of being human. And so in this work, in this white anti-racist work, I really want us all to think of ourselves as part of this white anti-racist community that you, Lynn, so beautifully are elucidating, that we don't have to do it all by ourselves. We can call up someone and think through something. We can say, hey, can you listen to the song? Can you help me stuff this envelope? Will you come to my multicultural potluck and invite people like this? We're all part of a larger thing.
Yeah.
So it's 6 minutes to 1, 5 minutes to 1 now. Should we leave it at that and go into small groups with some prompts and then come back? Or do we want to, you want to talk about Bob Zellner?
I'll happy to do either. I personally would love to start hearing some of the voices of other folks in the room.
Okay. Well, let me give you, I'm sorry, Lynn, go ahead.
Oh, I'll leave it up to you.
Okay. So what I want to ask is what's alive for you? What excited you or inspired you about what you heard? Is there something in your own life? Is there a place in your own life where you would like to take a next step as a white anti-racist, whether that's learning more or starting something or joining something or writing something, anything? Is there a next step that you're inspired to take? And if you don't know, that's okay. And then lastly, do you have any questions or comments for Lynn? So again, that's anything that's alive for you about what you've heard, anything you're inspired to, any next steps you're inspired to take in your own life, or any questions or comments for Lynn. And we're going to put you in groups of 2 or 3, and you can process this for, let's say, 15 minutes, and then we'll bring you back and we can interact some more.
Guys, we'll see.
Oh, thank you. If I might just say something, you know, I'm an African American woman, and you know, I was listening very intently, and it was so inspiring to me to hear the stories behind, you know, just the struggles that white people have, you know, when they come forward and they say, you know, that they want to do anti-racist work, and some of the backlash that you get. And, you know, as a Black person, you know, this is something we go through all the time, but it takes a real power, strength and courage and bravery, you know, for a white person to sign up to do this work, because it sounds like, you know, you guys are targeted and attacked for trying to stand up to do what's right, is kind of what I got from what you were saying.
Yeah, and another way of looking at it is when we start to peel away the veil of illusion that is whiteness and white supremacy, those who want to maintain it will try to get us to shut up because they think that's the only thing that's going to keep them going.
So I found that very inspirational. You know, I am learning as I go myself. You know, I wrote a book that was just based on lived experiences and in what we experience, systemic racism wise in the workplace. But this was a calling that I've now taken on. And so I'm learning, you know, what I can do as a Black person to further this movement. And it was just really inspirational to listen to, you know, the work that you guys are not only doing, but the challenges and the struggles that you have when you get pushback from other white people.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So if you don't want to go into a breakout room, let David know. Otherwise, he will put you into breakout rooms and you can delve into what's alive for you, what you're inspired to do next in your life, if anything, and any questions or thoughts that you have for Lynn.
And the technical, what's going to happen is you'll all automatically be moved into groups of 2 or 3 people for 14 minutes, and then a 60-second countdown timer will start, and you'll see all the times up on your breakout room. Then you'll all automatically be moved back to the main session, and your breakout room is not recorded as part of this, just so you all know. All right, here we go.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I think we're going to leave the room.
There's Kobe. This person just got in the waiting room just when we were starting the breakout session. Do you want to let them in and talk to them now? Wait, you're muted. Or I can't. There you go.
Yeah, we can let them in if Kobe doesn't want to be part of the
Yeah,
breakouts.
because it's hard for him to. Well, he could just lurk. Well, anyway, I'll admit here.
Pause the recording.
Like really well-known scholars say that, you know, oh, it's different.
Yeah. So we're back in the group now. We're just winding up the conversation being white and Jewish. So I'm guessing you all are brimming with thoughts, questions, ideas, feelings. It's wide open now to share any questions or thoughts for Lynn, anything that's alive for you. You can just speak up.
There's just so much, Jill. I asked a friend, you were talking about being Jewish. I asked a friend who is Black and Jewish, and she was shunned by her grandparents that were white.
Mm.
And when I asked her to speak about her experience about being Black, and she had told me prior that she had some, you know, different background, mixed background. She said it was like I was asking her to tell about being raped. That's how deeply she felt about this horrific thing that had happened to her by being shunned by part of her family. And I just felt like, wow, I'm so sorry for intruding on that experience. And she kind of didn't want to tell me. And I said, it's okay, you don't have to talk about it. It's really okay. I didn't understand just what that meant to you. So I feel really sensitive to like, wow, that was one of the first people I asked. And a lot of what's going on, I feel like, okay, I'm very open and I'll talk about anything and I'll just kind of toss questions out there. But sometimes I feel like there's assumptions being made about me. You know, people don't know my history. They don't really know me. They can ask questions. I'll talk to them, but goes on everywhere. Like we see people of different races, we make assumptions about them just because the way they look, they're tall, they're thin, they're fat, they're whatever. But I don't know someone's makeup of their, you know, how they think about anti-racist, you know, being white or whatever. I don't know about any of this, you know, their political background. Just having a discussion is interesting to me, but I feel like we're very highbrow here and we're talking about this stuff. I'm like, I am totally lost. Like you guys are so much more advanced than I want to go to like the more granular level. I understand like certain things that are we all in agreement about certain things, or is there a question about like if you're doing bad in the world, if you're ripping off people, does it matter your color? Are you seen fairly if you're doing the same thing if you're a person of color or if you're white? Like what's going on there? No one talked about it at the last meeting, and I'm sitting there like there was this elephant in the room, and I'm thinking there's people going, oh, it's okay, they don't have to go to jail. And I'm like, why? Well, because they're a person of color, and if we put them in jail, there's going to be this backlash. It's like,
So
well,
I'm not sure. I can't speak to that conversation because I wasn't there, but I wanted to speak to what you said.
There wasn't a
What?
conversation, and this was a missing conversation.
Oh,
No one's talked about that, and I'm thinking, I don't even know how to, you know, broach that subject. Like,
well, let me stop you for a minute. I'm not aware of people saying that people who commit crimes shouldn't go to jail, but I am aware of. What's that?
It's happening all over the country.
I can't speak to that because I'm not familiar with the terms of that discussion. But what you said earlier, I can speak to about people will look at you and they don't know your background. That's true. None of us knows very much about each other's backgrounds. However, those of us who have light skin and are perceived as white will get white privilege whether we ask for it or not. regardless of whether we were raised poor, whether we were abused, whether we're Jewish and the KKK wants to kill, our family, or my, in some cases in my family, people were killed in the Jewish Holocaust. I still get white skin privilege. I'm still not going to be followed in a store and possibly asked to leave because they think I might be stealing something. Whereas Jackie might. Jackie, are you still here? Or any of my brown or black friends, statistical likelihood is they're more likely to be stopped while driving their cars, killed in their own homes, not get the loans they need, and so on. So both of those things are true. We don't know all about someone by looking at them, and our experiences can differ radically just because of how other people perceive us, correctly or not.
Yeah, I mean, we all have our story, and we feel different things. Might be, I'm a woman, or I'm overweight, or I'm treated a certain way by the way I look. So I get that happens to all of us.
And the way that white supremacy mythology works is, if we have light skin and we are, female or overweight or disabled or whatever it is, if you add to that being black, then we also suffer from white supremacy mythology's effects. Whereas if we have light skin, we don't. We just have to deal with the other things. I want to make. Is it okay to? So Julia, is it? Can we leave this for the moment, because I want to make room for other people. We don't have that much more time. But I think I want to validate all of your questions. I love that you're digging into this stuff. It's really thorny. It's really deep.
The only other thing I wanted to say are there assumptions being made about us because we're white, that we feel a certain way about people of color? Just assumptions, just general assumptions across the board.
Some people might be doing that, and they're doing that because of historical trauma, usually. And so I try not to take any of that personally. And that's a process in and of itself, to dissociate, to disentangle ourselves from the whiteness and everything that gets projected about that.
I'd like to, I'm really interested in what everybody's saying and learning a lot from people. I want to put in a plug for organizations like Surge, showing up for racial justice. And I'm not sure where everybody is with that, if you already are way ahead of me. But for me, one of the big things has been being in a group of white people, which already feels like, maybe you shouldn't be doing that, but being in a group of white people and talking about racism and talking about all these questions with each other, where we can kind of learn together, but without putting trauma or expectations or work onto people of color, is, for me, it's just really huge and valuable in my own journey as an anti-racist, and learning to be more of an organizer and speaking out and, doing what I can. So anyway, Surge or other white anti-racist groups are a great place to explore these things and kind of come to a more like systemic view of what's going on, and kind of be able to get past the questions of like, well, anyway, just the basic questions of what is privilege, what is systemic racism, why aren't everybody equal to just do what they want, and take it further. So, and then the other thing is, I love Lynn's work because it really shows, warts and all, kind of the journeys of different white people and how they struggled with questions and had doubts and maybe even resentment or bad times. And some people even burned out, dropped out. And Lynn doesn't shy away from showing that. And it really gets away from this sort of individualist thing of, I'm gonna be in the movie where I go and I teach Black kids to read, or I, say the thing that makes everything better, and then I win. I'm the white person who fixed that, and it really shows the long haul and gives me strength to kind of keep going. So thank you, Lynn. And thank you, Jill, for having this today.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I want to kind of build off of that, and it's also really good to see you here. I also want to plug Surge, and like Nancy was saying, there are, I think, over 150 chapters, and it's not the only place, but it is an easy to find place where white people can learn how to do this work and also have the opportunities to talk about their own histories, their own family histories, the questions that they have, and can have all of that discourse. You know, Surge chapters present those opportunities for white people to wrestle with whatever it is that they need to wrestle with and come to understand on the anti-racist journey. And I also just want to say, you know, in alignment with what Nancy was saying, we learn, this is what I think that we learn just as much from the messiness of this history and from the mistakes that have been made in this history as we do from the things that went really, really, really well. You know, one of my beliefs is that you know, one of the things that's powerful about stories is that stories about real human beings are, you know, those are real human beings, meaning that they're messy, that they're like us. And when we see anti-racist lessons in the form of stories about real people who we can relate to, I feel like it makes those lessons a lot, you know, easier to digest. And I think it also, you know, we're imperfect just like everyone else in history has been imperfect. And when we see imperfect people, that's where we find a lot to, you know, to potentially relate to. So I think of an example like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, incredible civil rights organization, mobilizing the grassroots, doing all kinds of incredible work. There's just as much to learn from how white people did incredible work with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee as to how so much of it, you know, fell apart. So just want to second what Nancy said there. And I'm sorry, I'm going to add on one more thing. Sometimes people ask me the question of, is this history, you know, centering whiteness in some way? Is this about white saviorhood in one way, in some way? And I think that if we do present images of white anti-racists without their messiness, without their growing process, without their complexity, and if we make other mistakes, like putting them more front and center in the movement than they actually were, then yeah, we can potentially, if we don't frame this the right way, we can potentially be engaging in white saviorhood. So I think part of what we need to do too is precisely so that we can avoid that mistake, to like avoid to learn these people, to learn about these people in all of their fullness, which includes their growing process and everything else.
So there's some questions coming through in the chat that we may or may not have time to get to, but I have probably about 15 minutes afterwards. We can have an after party and get into some of these things. So right now I want to see if there's anyone who hasn't spoken who wants to share something that came up or have a question for Lynn. Or...
I have a question. Do we have white anti-racists who are more recent than the civil rights movement? Because I love learning about that time, but it feels like we just lost a couple of decades there between then and now.
I think Lynn has a lot of backfill to do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, in those 41 pieces, and someone had asked me about white abolitionists in the chat. So I actually dropped a link to the 41 different white anti-racist ancestors that I've written about so far. So if you look in the chat, you can find that link. Most of that writing has been about ancestors/elders. So there's not a lot in that specific series about, say, post-1980s. But I think, you know, there's a lot of, you know, when I think of the work that's been done since then, you know, if I was going to talk about more recent white anti-racists, I mean, I think that Seagrass is one of them. My friend James Tracy has a book called No Fascist USA, which is a book, in fact, I have it right here. I'll hold it up for you all. That's a book about, here's the book. It's a book about an organization called the John Brown Anti-Klan Committee. And that's an organization that's doing great work, including fighting, you know, the kind of things that Mab was fighting, but also fighting the rise of mass incarceration. And then coming up even to more recent times, you know, we have the Institute for Survival and Beyond. It's not all about white anti-racism, it's about racial justice. But I'm not sure exactly when it started, but they they're an organization that was doing a lot of training specifically about how do we tackle systemic racism, how do we take down these systems. And out of that Institute for Survival and Beyond, we have people like Sharon Martinez, who founded an organization called Challenging White Supremacy Workshop. That was in the 90s. And then the Catalyst project grows out of the Challenging White Supremacist project. And a lot of the people from Catalyst are involved in Surge when that's founded shortly after President Obama was elected. So this lineage continues. That's all I want to say, is that there's all kinds of examples going through the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Was that the type of response that you were looking for, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read your profiles, so I'll start reading them. I feel that it's important to not only be looking at the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
One of the people.
The struggle is current. The struggle went on from there, and the struggle is very current.
Yeah.
There's a very young woman, one might say a girl, I think she's 15. Her name, excuse me, I believe is Emily Rose Smith. Excuse me a sec. She was one of 4 or 5 founding members of a group called Teens for Equality. And I posted the story in the chat.
Jill, if I can just jump in while you're getting your voice back, as I popped over, I was in our group, we were, this question came up. Alyssa and I were part of the same group. And I was thinking of what Lynn had said earlier about working with white middle school students. And when I was a teacher, that was the age group I worked with. And so I loved hearing about that. And I love that you posted that, because I was thinking about the fight for climate, to engage more people in addressing climate change, and how many young people are involved in that. I think a lot of adults would say, there are heroes on that front. And so to hear about them and racial justice movements as well, I think is really inspiring and encouraging to me. So thank you for posting that.
Mm-hmm. There's a whole movement within outdoor education and wilderness looking at anti-racism within that. So the reason these are top of mind for me is I actually tried to track down Emily Rose Smith and interview her for this series, but I was unable to do that. And then there's another youngish woman, maybe in her 20s or early 30s, who is leading some anti-racist work within wilderness / outdoor education movements. I think that stuff is really powerful, because it's obvious why a Black or brown person might want to end racism. I think it's less obvious to the masses why a white person would want to do that, because on the face of it, it seems like it's in our interest to have white advantage, white privilege. But if we look a little deeper, we see that we've been stripped of some of our own culture, some of our own humanity. I'm working on a book right now called Skin in the Game: How White People Benefit from Dismantling White Supremacy. And it's really blatant in poorer communities, like in Jonathan Metzel's book, how white people are the politics of racial resentment is literally killing white people. It's a little less obvious for middle class white people. A lot of us are financially benefiting from the capitalist white supremacist system. We're told that it's a marker of adulthood, to invest in our IRAs every year, and that we're being responsible when we do this, and yet we're basically lending money to the 1% to further this whole system. So it's very confusing to pull all this stuff apart.
Oh, I want to say one thing about the civil rights, the focus on the civil rights, and that's one thing I appreciate about Lynn. I'm the fan club here. Is the reality is we are aging, and Lynn, you're capturing the oral histories of people who, you know, are here now and won't always be here. And I think that's really, as a historian, I think that's like a super valuable service to all of us. And then as the young people who are doing things now age, then, you know, historians will look at them and be able to, you know, kind of synthesize their journey more over time or whatever. But yeah.
I also
Yeah.
wanted to,
Also,
sorry, Alina, were you going to say something?
yeah, one of the things that I've been noticing in my own organizing over the years is that I've been learning more and more about how to lead from behind, which I think is kind of crucial as white folks. So I try to support my BIPOC friends in leadership, and, you know, in what ways can I support? And so in some ways, there's less visibility. You know, I mean, there are tons of white anti-racist activists and many might be not as visible for good reasons, as well as fear, you know, because there's plenty of that too. So but it is an interesting dance, I found, and I as I've been bringing this stuff to my communities, I definitely get pushback, like, you know, and, you know, told to, like, you know, organize a social justice thing if that's what your focus is, instead of organizing this thing that I want to be organizing, you know. And so
What do you mean, this thing that you want to be organizing?
well, like I've been, I was organizing communal song gatherings, and in the last, I did it for like 7 years. In the last 4 years, I had did a big push on trying to make both the facilitators and participants to have there be a lot more BIPOC folks, and what that meant over time is that a lot of these issues came up, and so it became like in the last gathering, issues of racial justice were a big part of the event. And so there was a lot less singing and a lot more talking about it. And so lots of white folks were like, go do a social justice song gathering or a racial justice song gathering and leave us to our white, you know, and so, you know, it's painful, but it's sort of a both and, because I think I will, because I think it is important. And I'm sad to kind of have to leave the space open to what's looking like some white guy taking it up and continuing it to be a white dominated thing, as I, you know, do more and more multiracial work, both in that and in other things. So anyway, I do feel like it's crucial for white folks to organize, and there's also a need for the multiracial connecting too. So it's got to be both and.
Yeah, and I really feel for this particular question of, so here you are in an art-oriented organization, and I'm in the exact parallel situation right now. I've been hired to do diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work for an arts-oriented organization. And the people in the organization don't want to stop doing the artistic thing that they're doing and get all up into their heads and focus on this thing that is confusing and painful and most white people don't want to deal with. They want to keep doing what they showed up to do. And so maybe you and I can, and anyone else who wants to, can think together about this. So my question is, how can we take the existing momentum of an arts-oriented organization and use that particular focus to kind of make it fun and build out, you know, multicultural, like in your case, song, you know. So that's a question that I have. And I think it's it's a microcosm of a larger question, which is, how do we bring this in to more people? How do we make it fun and embodied? And speaking of embodied, is everybody breathing? We take a few breaths together. Feel our bodies, wiggle our toes, move our shoulders. Hand on the belly, hand on the heart, if that feels good. And this is intense stuff. Woo, woo. Bye, Jody. I'll be in touch. Like to email you if you don't want to be emailed by me anymore. You can hit don't email me anymore, but I got a lot of relevant stuff to share with you that I'd love to share. So just, chat me if you don't want me to ever email you again, and I won't. But otherwise I will send you stuff and you can always opt out. Other thoughts, questions for Lynn? Anything you feel inspired about? Are you pissed off? I'm sorry, David, you had your hand up before and I didn't call on you. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I love you.
Lynn, earlier you mentioned about a sense of belonging. You talked about that. And I'm wondering to who or what you feel like you belong personally.
It's a really interesting question. The first thing that's coming up for me, is, okay, here's what's coming up for me. One of the beautiful experiences that I've had since I launched this project has been, the project has been a way for me to reach out to white people, to white movement ancestors, people who I admire, people who inspire me, people who I feel like I can learn from, and to build connections with them, as well as to build connections with different white anti-racist communities, like surge chapters around the country. And that what's been beautiful about that is there's been a sense of this project has been a way for me to feel really connected and to feel inspired by and rejuvenated by the good work that people are doing all around the country right now, and to feel and to be able to tap into that and get a sense for, even though there are plenty of problems happening in the world, the more I have connected with the people who are doing the work all around the country, the more, I also feel a sense of hopefulness and connection and belonging with that broader kind of movement, and a sense of belonging with the lineage, that I write about. Some people ask me about the word ancestor, and when I say white anti-racist ancestors, a lot of people think of ancestor as a biological thing. So I think as white people, it's important to look at our biological ancestors and like where we come from. But I think it's also important to look at, who are our movement ancestors, who are the white people in history who we would aspire to walk in the path that whose shoulders we might want to be on. So part of the sense of belonging for me is the sense of belonging of kind of like feeling like the more I know about this history, the more I feel grounded and standing on the shoulders of others who have come before me.
David, I'm curious how that lands with you.
I know why you're asking me that.
It's optional to answer.
I guess I'm fascinated by the fact that it is a sense of belonging to people that are no longer alive, the past and the present, to a sort of a cause or I don't know what you'd call it, I don't know if cause is the right word, but is there a name for this group that you belong to? What would you call it?
I mean, it just feels to me like it
doesn't need a name.
No, there's this notion that freedom is a long distance struggle. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it really is a sense of belonging to an intergenerational struggle to, to get as close as we can to ending white supremacy and creating a world that is the beautiful world that we all deserve to live in. It's a sense of belonging to the intergenerational struggle. And not just, struggle might be a heavy word, but to all the, to walk along with all the amazing people in this intergenerational movement, world a better place. So part of it, part of it's kind of abstract. And part of it also is, actually talking with movement elders who I've come to, really, really love and care for, and part of it is also the intergenerational part of it too, is also, doing the work to, raise the next generation and support them and taking the work farther than we can ever take in our own lifetimes. And building community around that, once again, lifting up what Nancy mentioned, Surge, right? Like there are very real flesh and blood communities who we can become a part of, right now, who are in this kind of long haul, intergenerational movement.
White
To a cause
anti-racist.
yeah, I was saying belonging to a cause or
Mm-hmm.
mission and belonging to communities is that's what more could you want? Great, thanks.
One of the ideas that I've been working with along these lines, actually, you know what, Marla, you put a question in the chat above. I'm going to pick, do you still want to ask that question? I just put it in again.
Hi.
Hi.
Lynn and I had a wonderful conversation about that
Hmm.
during the breakout. And I guess all I want to do is kind of explain why that came up. And I'm a person of color.
Mhm.
And I have had conversations with people doing social justice work where there's a lot of emphasis placed on making sure we don't offend or get too angry
Mhm.
or make people uncomfortable. And, I viscerally reject that because I feel like, give me 15 minutes to get it off my chest.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we talked about that at length, and it was very enlightening to hear Lynn say, you're absolutely right. It's not about comfort. It's not about tone policing. You didn't use that phrase, Lynn. I'm not going to put that on you. But it's, that the idea that the work that we're trying to get done, the change that we're trying to see is not dependent on everybody feeling warm and fuzzy all the time. So
Yeah.
that was the basis for that.
Yeah, I think I'm, part of the reason when I work with white anti-racists in the leadership program, part of the reason that we spend 6 months of the 9 months doing inner work is so we can feel the integrity of ourselves. And you say, how do you feel about angry people of color? If somebody's angry at me, I can receive that. I can listen without leaving my body, without fighting back, without defending myself, because a lot of white reactivity is an unconscious defending of our own goodness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's very human to want to feel good about ourselves. And when we're told that our goodness is tied up with whiteness, and then that whiteness is somehow perceived to be threatened, people start reacting and defending. Well, what do you mean? You don't like white people? Seems like you really don't like white people. So this is like a lizard brain kind of, and so that's why we spend 6 months in this program feeling what it's like to actually be in our body and feel our own humanity and be sure of our goodness, so that we can see the context. We can see what gives rise to this anger. There are, as you know, really, really, really good reasons for this anger. I didn't start it, but now I'm part of the movement to repair it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That said, we also spend time thinking about how to be strategic my mentor, Dr. Cleo Monago, is a public figure and a man of African descent who spent a lot of his time listening and asking. Yeah, he has a way of asking the kind of question that it's like pulling a thread and like the whole thing unravels. And so we spent time discerning, and how do we want to show up? How do we want to be strategic? How do we want to be strategic so we can create the most influence and the most leverage? So holding both of those things, the truth of anger and making space for that and not take it personally. And also, how do we want to show up at any given moment? What is it exactly that we're going for?
That's great. We also talked a little bit about this backlash against wokeness. And again, in working with some social justice colleagues, the example was given of a student whose professor showed the film Othello with Laurence Olivier, and a student of color was triggered by the blackface. Ultimately, the professor was fired. And their take on that was, we don't want to show up as if all people of color are so delicate and so fragile. My take on it was, no, this is a young person who for the first time has been able to feel comfortable speaking his or her mind, letting out some of the steam. The failure to me is on the part of the administration, who didn't take that teachable opportunity.
Yes, the critical analysis. Yeah, we watch racist stuff in the 22nd Century Leaders Program with the goal of sharpening our lens. Polishing our lens, and to be able to see. He's laughing at me, mixing metaphors. As a writer, I'm not supposed to do that. Because my son will say, "Oh, let's watch something," or I'm like, but I've been trying to use television as a teachable opportunity for him since he was young.
Oh, goodness. What a challenge that must be.
Well, so we were watching this sort of vapid white sitcom for a number of years and kind of using it just, well, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that they said that? And then the sitcom was over and we didn't have anything to watch. And so one day he comes to me and says, "Hey, Mom, I found a new show. I think you'll like it. It has people of color and a strong female lead."
Oh, love it.
Well,
that's a win. That's one in the win column.
Yeah. Well, I want to show you something that's happening this Saturday for a moment. If I can share my screen. Yeah. So is it Saturday or Sunday? I can't remember. I'll send it out. December 12th. What's that? That's Sunday. Okay. So there's that word again, proculturate. And I'm curious, what do you notice about this graphic? So there's white hands planting, right?
In a desert.
Looks like you're planting.
It doesn't look like white hands, Joe.
Oh.
Not at all. Those are not white hands.
Planting the seed?
Yeah, that to me, it looks like Hispanic or someone that's darker skinned.
Huh.
Could be Asian, could be, but they're not, yeah.
Interesting. Well, that was my intention. And then this is a conversation apparently, and this is something growing. The idea is that we can do anti-racism, we can proculturate, we can create a white anti-racist culture wherever we are at any time. And one of the things that we focus on is how to be in conversation, how to be in our bodies so that we can be in conversation. And I'm going to start by celebrating some of my own failures, because it's through failures that we can get really honest and vulnerable with each other. And we can learn, like, don't do what I did that time. Let's try something different. And the motto is stumble forward. And we're going to look at this sort of wheel of possibility of, are we a steward? Are we, where do we like to show up? Is it in relationship? Is it in writing? Is it in teaching? Is it in organizing? Is it in art? Is it in archiving things? Is it being a steward, a historian like Lynn? And there's so many different ways that there's as many ways as there are people for our own individual path. So we're going to meet each other and we're going to We're going to do some conversations practice. What happens in our bodies, what happens when we get with other people. We're going to find our community, and we're going to start to get clear about what our own path is in this, and how can we polish that lens of discerning white supremacy mythology, and then deal with the, oh shit, I've been in this muck deeper and longer than I ever could have imagined. Now what? Now what do I do? Well, we're going to keep shaking off, cleaning it off, grieving, feeling our shock, and keep going. So I want to invite you, if you are inspired by this work and want to find your own path, maybe you too will be on Lynn's site one day in that collage. Any questions about that before we go back and wind up? Okay, and as I said, I'll be on afterwards if you want to keep talking. And Lynn, you have an event coming up. Oh, I wanted to mention two other things. One of them is that I've started a conversations project. We're going to get good at having conversations with the other white people in our lives. And we're going to help each other. We're going to start recording the conversations so that they can go viral, because this country may be poised on the brink of civil war or something like it. And I think if we can reach out to the white people in our lives who are agitated and help them unpack what's going on and see if there are ways to meet their needs other than violence, we might have a chance. But there aren't enough of us right now to go and have these conversations with everyone. So if we can have some transformative conversations on video, I think tape is the outdated term, right? Nobody knows what tape is. We can video these conversations, and David is a video genius, and have some of them go viral, then we can perhaps create a vicarious experience of transformation that white people who are amped with their guns and ready to go might look at and go, huh, do I really need this gun? Do I really need this Confederate flag? It's a hypothesis. I don't know. But that's one of the things we're doing in this Monday afternoon conversations group. It happens every Monday at noon. It's by donation. Everybody's welcome, but we are going to be focusing on white. So I don't know how much fun that will be for people of color to witness, but you are welcome there. And I'll be sending out all those links very, very soon. And Lynn, you have an event coming up.
Yes, I do. And I just dropped it in the chat for those who are interested. This is going to be a workshop about what white anti-racists today can learn from the life of Anne Braden. And I'm putting it on as an end-of-year event with Surge Bay Area. And there's going to be a lot of great people in the house, so come in if you want to learn from one of the very best people, in white anti-racist movement history, and feel into what you could learn from them. Come and check this workshop out as well. And I also invite people to explore my website, hop on crossculturalsolidarity.com. Click on the resources tab there, and you will find all kinds of resources on racial justice history.
I'm not seeing that link.
Let me see.
I just put it in.
Oh, the event is on that website. Okay.
So the event.
Wait, he sent it just to me. I'll put it in the.
Oh, my bad. Thank you so much.
It's very confusing, the chat. I did that already like twice. Send it to one person.
Private message, yeah.
All right,
Okay.
there it is. There it is.
And Kylie, you sent a message to everyone that looks like it might have been meant for one person. Well, it's 1:57. Does anybody else have any burning things to share? Or Lynn, was there anything else you wanted to add to today?
Yeah, there was one final thing, and I think David might have actually just put it in the chat. Yeah, I want to circle back to something that Alyssa mentioned. She's raising the issue that we're talking about history and white anti-racist ancestors, but this is about work that we're doing right now. It's about making the world a better place in the future. So if you want to really get my full thinking on how learning from, excuse me, from how learning from white anti-racist ancestors in the past, how learning from excellent anti-racist role models, if you want to get my full thinking on how that can really help us build stronger white anti-racist movements today, bring more white people into the movement, deepen our own personal anti-racist capacities, David shared an article that I wrote called White Anti-Racists Have Ancestors, and that really makes a strong case for how this can help us build the movements that we need to have today. So it's very much, I'm writing about history, but it's very much about the present. I just want to make that really clear at the end.
Lynn, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for this work that you're doing. David, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I had one other question. Are we trying to end at 2 o'clock? Is it?
We're going to officially end at 2, but I'm going to stay on for an after party for at least 15 minutes because I have a meeting at 2.
Well, I'll at least say my quick question here. What do you think future historians years from now will say about the present as far as what we're doing in this whole?
I think we live in a really critical time right now. You know, on the one hand, when we look at the Black Lives Matter movement, and when we look at, you know, specifically the uprising over the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, that's a really important, I think that's going to be remembered as a historical moment, partly because we're living in a moment where more white people than at any time in US history are wanting to show up for racial justice. And I think that that's an important moment in history. So my own primary historical background is in Black freedom struggle history. And it's in that context of studying Black freedom struggle history that I've seen over and over again throughout that history, Black freedom fighters saying, white people, you need to mobilize other white people. Marcus Garvey said it, Malcolm X said it, Fannie Lou Hamer said it, you know, Stokely Carmichael, the Black Panther Party. You know, there's always been this call from the Black freedom struggle for white people to organize other white people, but it's never been done in really large numbers. And I think that we're in a moment right now where it potentially could actually be done to such an extent that we could really change the country in the way that it's needed to change for a very long time. So I think historians will look at this moment as a moment where white people, you know, hopefully really start to show up for racial justice in a way that I think will lead to historical change. I think there's also the flip side of that, where there's a lot of backlash right now. There's a growing kind of right-wing insurgency, and I think historians will also judge us based on how we respond to what we need to be responding to right now.
What do you think of that, David? Well, actually, before you answer that, it's 2:01. So let me officially end and say thank you so much again, Lynn. Thank you, David, for the technical and back-end support and for being there as you always are. Really appreciate you. And thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to stay on. I'm going to take a 1 minute quick bio break and I'll be right back.
I've got to scoot, but I wanted to tell everybody who's still here how much I enjoyed this. And Lynn, I'll be in touch with you about finally bringing you down to San Diego at some point in the next 2 months, I think. And thank you everybody, and goodbye.
I just realized I was muted.
Oh, yeah, me too.
I was inviting people into more conversation. I'm not sure if it was heard or not.
No, I didn't hear anything, and I was muted too.
You're very quiet, David. I just can't hear you through your microphone. I was starting to type, but I'll just talk since, yeah, thank you, that's better. Lynn, I definitely appreciate what you're saying about claiming the white anti-racist ancestors. And I definitely agree with the importance of that in terms of it's part of really having a collective identity, because I've seen Black organizations do that, where they're claiming ancestors that are community ancestors that are not their genealogical or, you know, family tree actual ancestors, but they're claiming them as ancestors and celebrating them. So I definitely appreciate that, and your comments on that helped me to understand, you know, why so much focus on the civil rights movement.
Alyssa, do you, I mean, and Lynn, is this what whiteness should be? I mean, can't we just say this, we're going to start calling this whiteness now? Good whiteness. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like, just redefine what it means to be white. Say it's not white supremacy. It's in the tradition that you're historicizing. I don't know what the word is. Writing about.
Yeah. For me, the question is, how do we want to show up in the world as white people, right?
Yeah.
And I think we need a lot of things to show up as white people in this world in the way that we would really aspire to. We need community, you know, we need to be on the ground, you know, having experiences that we learn from, you know, organizing on the ground, and you know, and I see this as one tool out of many different tools and resources that we need. I see this as one tool built to help us show up in the world as white people in the way that we would hope to. I want to make one more comment too regarding Alyssa, because you've mentioned the civil rights movement. What I'm actually hoping to do is to really trace white anti-racist history from early abolitionism against slavery, you know, up to our present time. So I think in that short collection that I put together so far, I think it does overemphasize the civil rights movement, just because that happens to be an era that I've studied really thoroughly. But my goal would be to really present, you know, what is the full lineage, you know, of this history, because the struggle against racial oppression and for racial justice is obviously starts from the very beginning of white folks coming to this country.
Mm-hmm. Do you have John Brown? Do you do John Brown?
I haven't done John Brown. I haven't done a profile of John Brown yet, but John Brown will definitely be there. Yeah. And I think, you know, he's such a good example of you know, even though like we might not want to literally take up arms, you know, I think he's an example of a white person who is very willing to do what is necessary to take down, you know, systems of inequity. So the question, I feel like he's an example that even if we don't want to do exactly what he did, I think there's a lot to learn from John Brown.
Yeah, I just read The Good Lord Bird. And it made me realize that even though I grew up in Minnesota and always thought that, you know, I was from the North, you know, I knew the song John Brown's Body with this terrible Confederate mentality against him, you know, and it just made me realize that.
Yeah.
One thing I don't know, and you can enlighten me, was John Brown motivated by his religion, by his Christianity, or? Okay.
Hugely.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually,
and I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
The next 7 or 8 white anti-racist figures who I'm going to be writing about actually all come from some kind of Christian background. And you know, I think that, you know, when I think about changing white anti-racist culture, I think of churches as potentially spaces that can mobilize a lot of people.
Absolutely.
And so it feels important to, since like white Christianity often is very shows up in this world in a very negative way. I think it's really critical to try to do something to try to put some stories out there about how white Christianity can actually show up in a way that is about justice, and to try to change those spaces so that they can help to mobilize those congregations and those communities. Because if white Christians, you know, do arrive at an understanding of what white anti-racism really looks like, that's a lot of mobilization that can potentially happen. So I hope to get those examples out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot, you know, in terms, I think in like a meta principle that I mentioned earlier is harnessing the momentum that's already there, like within an arts organization to want to do art. That's what they show up to do. Religious people show up for their religion. There's so much in Christianity that supports anti-racism, you know? And, you know, David has talked about the cognitive dissonance in white religious people and white liberals between, you know, how many of us think of ourselves and the kind of people we think of ourselves as being, and the reality of doing nothing or exacerbating white supremacy mythology.
The evangelical would be an example.
That cognitive dissonance causes physical disease. So here's a very health-minded physical reason why white supremacy causes disease to white people.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, when you talk about centering whiteness, I think when you fix a problem, you need to name the problem, and then you need to focus on it and work on it. Whiteness is the problem, so we do need to center it to fix it, not to eclipse Black people and brown people, but to remedy all of the harm that we have done.
Had a discussion recently about a workshop that someone participated in, and they were uncomfortable with what they saw as the white folks almost self-flagellating, you know, sharing their experiences. Oh, I'm a horrible person. I have so much to make up for. I have so much to overcome. Have you encountered that point of view?
It's the classic dynamic in white anti-racist spaces. There's
I'm a piece of shit around which the universe revolves. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of guilt and a lot of shame, and it often, you know, it often ends up taking the center of the conversation and also the center of a white person's energy instead of putting their energy towards a place of actually changing unequal systems. Sometimes it can, you know, so much attention can be put on the shame and the guilt, and you know that ends up disrupting, you know, what the work really needs to be, and it can end up, you know, centering white people. You know, once again, to think of the importance of white people, you know, gathering, you know, in white anti-racist spaces and being able to talk amongst themselves with more experienced white people, is that, you know, that guilt and that shame, it's there, it exists, and it needs a place to be processed, and it needs a place to also be moved through. It's like white people need to get to the other side of that, so that effective white anti-racists. But that's the kind of work that's hard to do by themselves. So it's something that, you know, people should have places to do that in community. And ideally it's in white anti-racist spaces, so that it's not Black and brown people having to like listen to white people talk about their guilt and shame all the time.
I want to say one thing about that, which is when I hear, Jill's heard me say this a gazillion times, whenever I hear the word guilt, I translate that into my mind, into what do I owe somebody? Literally, like I owe somebody something. If I feel guilty, I owe them something. And if I feel guilty or shame or guilt, very similar things, it's I owe somebody something. Who do I, it's just, if you follow that simple train of thought, it's, hey, we have to do something. I owe them something. I owe something. Yeah. That's where the guilt is from. I have to do something.
I also think, I agree with you, David. I often describe it as, you know, most humans have decent impulses. Like, you know, if Lynn broke his toe and he's got a cast on and we're standing in the bus and the bus lurches and I stomp on his toe, I'll probably feel bad and I want to say, can I help you? Can I get you some ice? You know, however, if, you know, white people are born into a white supremacy mythology based system that we get stuff from at the expense of Black and brown people, it's not as simple as, oh gosh, I'm sorry, let me make it up to you. Because it's systemic. So we don't have a simple recourse to remedy the guilt and shame that we're carrying for being part of an unjust system that keeps giving us stuff at the expense of Black and brown people. And one of the things that I do when people I'm working with seem like they're mired in guilt is I try to translate that into a quote unquote cleaner emotion. Like, are you feeling grief? Are you feeling regret? Are you longing to be able to do something? Because there usually is something in there that is deeper. Like, yeah, I actually feel really sad about all this, or I feel angry. And then we can be with that, because those kinds of emotions are really alive. Guilt and shame are things that often get layered over more alive emotions that can inspire action. Then we can work with the stuff underneath. Oh, and one more thing I wanted to say about that is that system that has white people feeling either, I mean, there's a predictable range of responses. You know, on the one end are overt white supremacists who try to defend the system, and there are people who don't want to talk about it, but they also don't want to be associated with the overt white supremacists. Then there are people who are kind of confused and shaking off the haze, and then there are people who are really clear that something needs to be done at various levels. That system produces these very confused and compacted and twisted up mindsets. That we get to now reckon with. So it's 2:15. I need to drop. You all are welcome to hang out on this call as long as you want. I don't know what happened if I leave, but I have a meeting at 2:30. I need to go.
And I actually have to be somewhere or myself, so I need to get going as well.
Thank you.
Jill,
thank you so much for hosting this and for inviting me to be with you today.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you again, David. And Marla, great to meet you. Thank you so much for coming and hanging.
Great meeting you too. And I have to say that this has been such an encouraging space to be in.
Oh, good.
And I thank you for allowing me in it.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really glad to have you.
Okay. All right, y'all. Take care. Look forward to following up.
Thank you for the bonus time here.
All right.
Bye.
Right. All right. Take care, everyone.
Okay.